Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's April 5th, 2025. I'm your host, Nate Pike, and it's been a minute since we've done a live show. We spent the entirety of the month of March focusing entirely on coal. And the coal mining that's going on in the proposed coal mining that's going on in the Eastern Slopes. We've got a couple of updates on that tonight. We're going to be having hopefully a conversation with one of the people who made that whole interview series possible. But also, Danielle Smith said a little something at a town hall that seemed to maybe tip the scales, maybe show her hand a little bit in regards to what's going on with the coal stuffs in Alberta. We're going to get to that in a bit. We have a huge show tonight. This is what happens when we go away for a month or so. Everything sort of backlogs. So we're not going to go through everything that's happening. And I want to be really, really clear. We are staying focused, laser-like on Alberta politics. I know that there's a federal election. We've been getting lots of messages from people asking if we're going to do anything in regards to the federal election. No, we play in Alberta politics. That's our sandbox. We will stay in that sandbox. And let's get right to it, because we got to. Can we just talk about the AI for a second? For those of you that are listening to the audio version of this, you're not going to really appreciate the full flavor of the work that our graphics department did. But that's not real, to be clear. We have a couple of we've been playing with the AI, and it works, because we got to talk about popsicles. Before we get into the popsicle conversation, though, and this is fascinating because we actually had a UCP Constituency Association get up in our socials trying to say to us, hey, don't you know, AHS, nothing to do with the government. Let's be really, really clear. And it's important for pretty much everything that we're going to talk about tonight. Everyone needs to remember that the organization that is AHS is now under direct government control. By AHS, I'm talking about Alberta Health Services. There's a whole bunch of stuff that has gone on, which we will talk about in a little bit. That makes it very, very clear that the firewall that used to exist between the Alberta government and Alberta Health Services, Danielle Smith did a very, very good job of tearing that firewall down. So for the stories that we're talking about tonight, it's important to keep that in mind, because Danielle Smith went out of her way to make sure that she was able to reach directly into Alberta Health Services and make her will be known. She took full ownership of Alberta Health Services in that regard, because she wanted to execute on a longstanding plan to remove AHS as a health authority and make them just another service provider. So there's all of that preamble that we had to get out of the way in order to talk about popsicles, which is so much fun to start the show with if it wasn't so absolutely horrifying. What am I talking about here? Well, on March 22nd, we received a copy of an internal memo from AHS that was dated March 17th, and it detailed a new food policy that was being initiated. It was from acting senior operating officer to the senior vice president of AHS and the CEO of Recovery Alberta. So to be clear, it's the head mucky mucks in the Alberta Health Services organization. It detailed major changes, and we received that from an anonymous source, for the record. Thank you to our anonymous source. It was detailed major changes to how AHS was going to be providing food. And this is where it gets particularly relevant to the popsicle bit. It detailed cutbacks to essential nourishment items in emergency departments and urgent care centers, and the elimination of food in non-inpatient areas like day clinics. So anytime that you're not admitted to a unit in the hospital, you're in a non-inpatient area. And This memo said there shall be no more food in any of these inpatient areas. Sorry, non-inpatient areas. It also talked about the elimination of hypoglycemia kits because those diabetics should just, if they had dealt with the situation earlier, they probably wouldn't have gotten to that stage 4 diabetes or something. Well, on March 28th, the unintended consequences of that policy became painfully clear when a mother of a kid receiving cancer care in an outpatient clinic detailed how her son and all other kids receiving care had lost popsicles. This is the Facebook post that she put up at the time. Alberta Health Services later cuts to take away any food or drink from the kids battling cancer in the Alberta Children's Hospital Oncology Clinic. For almost 2 years in this clinic, our son continues to battle brain cancer. We have witnessed and experienced firsthand how a simple popsicle can calm a crying child who has just endured another needle prick or IV access or dressing change or a lumbar puncture or a ginger ale to calm a nauseated belly from all of those chemo meds. How this passed into action, I can't even imagine. Had they asked the nurses, the patients, the parents, maybe they would have realized that they could have cut back a bit on the meals that often go untouched but are necessary and relied upon meal for some, but the popsicles, the ginger ale, or the crackers when they literally cannot stomach anything else. So, to be clear, what happened with that was the Alberta government and AHS made the decision to pull popsicles because they are food from the inpatient clinic. So when a kid goes in to get their chemo or a kid goes in to get a diagnostic treatment, that can be really quite uncomfortable. The popsicles, they were not going to be there anymore. Adriana LaGrange was asked about this at a press conference just a couple of days after that Facebook post from that mom went up. And it's a longer clip, but it's worth listening to because in the process of that clip, Adriana LaGrange says that's absolutely not happening. And then reality sets in.
Children at the Children's Hospital Oncology Unit here in Calgary who are in for day treatments or life-saving things like intravenous treatments no longer have access to refreshments like popsicles, drinks, or crackers, which help keep them calm, nourished, and hydrated while they're undergoing treatment. I'm just wondering how the government justifies this decision, because it seems like for those children who are undergoing chemotherapy, remaining calm and hydrated is almost medically necessary. And I can tell you parents who are writing us about this are calling the move cold-hearted. So I guess my question to the minister is, how would you respond to those parents if you were looking them straight in the eye and telling them why this was a decision that had to be made?
And I would say that information is incorrect or being misinterpreted. I would say that, in fact, what AHS had proposed was to streamline their processes for food that they disperse out, and where it's medically required, where individuals are having surgery, particularly young children, absolutely they will be getting those popsicles or whatever else they require. This was more or less in areas where right now one hospital gives it, one doesn't, was to really make sure that if people didn't require those little snacks, that they consistently provided them or didn't provide them across the province. But in no way, at least from my understanding of the way AHS had presented it, was there to be any effect on someone who has cancer or anyone who's coming out of surgery, coming out of anesthetic. Oftentimes after endoscopies you get a little snack to stabilize. Nothing of that sort. I also understand that where diabetics are concerned, they're going to be providing glucose tablets as a way of also making sure that they have the glucose they need readily available.
Actually, the memo says, additionally, hypoglycemia kits will no longer be supplied. Glucose tablets should be obtained from the pharmacy as needed. But I'll go on to say that I'm looking right at an email from a person who has a child undergoing monthly treatments for cancer at the cancer center, who tells me that when he awakes from his lumbar punctures, the family has to ensure he is able to drink again before his IV comes out, and his ginger ale that they normally supply to him has to be brought by the parents from home now.
So my understanding was that that was not supposed to happen, and if that is happening, I will certainly look into it, because of course, we want our children to be looked after. We want everyone who's coming out of surgery or out of, significant procedures to have what they need, whether it's ginger ale, whether it's a popsicle. I'm a mother of 7, grandmother of 8. That is not the intent of what I understood was going to happen. And if something is different, I will absolutely make sure that we clarify it and make sure that those kids get what they need when they come out of those serious.
Now, there's a lot to unpack in that clip, and it's really important to be clear about that. The big things that I want to draw your attention to are the start of the clip, where the reporter said, hey, here's these things that are going on. I'm a little bit concerned about them. We're hearing from parents that are concerned about them. How do you justify this sort of thing? Lagrange's reaction should have been what her second reaction was, which was, wow, if that's what's going on, I have concerns and I'll look into it. But that wasn't her reaction. Her first reaction was to say, that's absolutely wrong. It's incorrect. You're misinterpreting the information. There's no way we would ever do that, which is almost like, it's pretty wild to watch a minister of the crown effectively gaslight a reporter. But fortunately, that reporter had all of the receipts that they needed, because they were able to say, yeah, no, what we've got the proof. The other thing that's particularly interesting is Lagrange pivoted to the whole piece about the glucose tablets. I understand that we'll be providing glucose tablets. And that's actually the opposite of what the memo says. But the fact that she pulled the glucose tablets piece out of the ether really kind of suggests that she had some awareness of the memo. Now, there's no proof of that. It's speculation, but it's fascinating that this policy happened and she had just enough to go, hey, the glucose tablets, I should talk about that for a second, even though she got that part completely wrong. Now, to be clear, on April 1st, the policy was paused and kids got their popsicles back. That happened because Adriana Lagrange directly contacted the CEO of Alberta Health Services, who, as we will work our way through the episode, much highlight, was her former deputy minister. And she said, hey, what the hell with the popsicles? And they paused the policy. They're doing a thing. But Smith was asked about the whole thing at a press conference on April 1st. And her response as well is pretty, it's important.
We received a memorandum about changes to food delivery in hospitals and urgent care centers. AHS has since said that the popsicles will remain, but can you give any clarification to this story? And can you, I guess, give any context in terms of what changes are going to be taking place?
All I can tell is that there was something lost in translation. What AHS, and this was a decision that was made back in September, their intention was to change food delivery so that they could reduce any potential spoilage and waste, which makes sense. We want to be efficient. We don't want food going to spoil or waste. But somehow that got implemented in a way that was not consistent with what the policy was. So when we heard these stories, Minister Lagrange immediately called over to AHS and said, what is going on? And the new CEO is putting a pause on the policy to find out why it was interpreted incorrectly. And if we can still find some ways to save, we want to make sure that we can save on food wastage. But the intention was never to deny patients sustenance while they're waiting for treatment or after treatment. So it was a misapplication and a misinterpretation of.
Now, there's a lot to unpack there, because here's what I want you to think about as we dissect that clip a little bit. That's the same Danielle Smith who broke down in tears when kids were being affected by E. coli. She's made it very, very clear in her in her public speaking that kids hold a special meaning to her. But in that clip, a couple of things happened, a couple of things didn't happen. The big thing that didn't happen was there was no apology. There was no apology to the parents. that were directly affected by this. There was no apology to the kids that were directly affected by this. There was no apology to all of the other patients in all of the other outpatient clinics who were affected by this. It was just, it was misapplication of the policy. What are you going to do? It is what it is. We're going to still try to save money. It's all about the dollars. Now, we got in a little bit of trouble back at the time that Danielle Smith put up her powerful Jasper performance and her powerful performance with the E. coli, where it was suggested that we were perhaps being a little bit callous because it was very clearly a performance. And the fact that Danielle Smith's response to, and again, I want to be clear, obviously the kids with cancer, they got the lion's share of the attention in this matter, but this was everybody who attends any outpatient clinic was affected by this. Danielle Smith showed no remorse, no emotion, no apologies for the fact that these kids and all of these other patients were affected. I guess it wasn't in her script for that day. Moving on from there, Danielle Smith, the line I have on the script here is Miss Smith goes to Washington, well, Florida anyways. Smith traveled to Florida on March 27th to appear on the PragerU podcast, which is titled Real Talk. Do with that what you will. I'm sorry. And the reason why she went down there was twofold to some degree. The main reason was that she was attending a PragerU event where she was going to share a stage with American podcaster Ben Shapiro. Now, that's how it was talked about, and that's how it was pitched to Albertans. But there were some other things with the event that were maybe not talked about so much. So first of all, this was a fundraiser for PragerU, costing at least $1,500 a ticket, and which, according to the National Observer, which is not to be confused with the National Post, the event raised over $1 million. So Danielle Smith traveled down to Florida to do a fundraiser for PragerU. Now, there's some things that we got to know about PragerU before we get into the nuts and bolts of the rest of it. PragerU is, of course, not a real university, and it has been criticized in the past for regularly producing far-right Christofascist content, including content that, according to Wikipedia, PragerU's videos contain misleading or factually incorrect information promoting creationism and climate change denial. Historians and political scientists have also criticized PragerU's videos for containing misleading or inaccurate claims about topics such as slavery and racism in the United States, immigration, the history of fascism. PragerU has been accused of promoting fascism, racism, sexism, and anti-LGBT policies. So there's a lot to unpack there. But maybe one of the things that we really, really need to unpack is that it's also worth noting that PragerU is also a registered charity. Much like the Canadian, what some people are saying, the Canadian equivalent, True North, which now goes under the name Juno News, but still functions under the True North umbrella. So it's still very much a charity. Now, all of this American media-ing comes on the heels of Danielle Smith's Breitbart appearance from earlier in March.
Pierre Poilievre is the name of the Conservative Party leader, and he was miles ahead of Justin Trudeau. But because of the what we see as unjust and unfair tariffs, it's actually caused an increase in the support for the Liberals. And so that's what I fear, is that the longer this dispute goes on, politicians posture, and it seems to be benefiting the Liberals right now. So I would hope that we could put things on pause, is what I've told administration officials. Let's just put things on pause so we can get through an election. Let's have the best person at the table make the argument for how they would deal with it. And I think that's Pierre Poilievre. And I do agree with you that if we do have Pierre as our prime minister, then I think that there's a number of things that we could do together. Pierre believes in development. He believes in low-cost energy. He believes that we need to have low taxes. Doesn't believe in any of the woke stuff that we've seen taking over our politics for the last 5 years. So I would think that there's probably still always going to be areas that are skirmishes or disputes about particular industries when it comes to the border. But I would say on balance, the perspective that Pierre would bring would be very much in sync.
Yeah, there's a lot in that clip. Danielle Smith obviously making the argument that tariffs should be stopped, not because tariffs are bad for Americans or Canadians, but because they gave the Liberals, in Danielle Smith's mind, a bump that saw the Liberals in the federal election that I just said I wasn't going to talk about unless it was involved with Alberta politics. It gave them a bump. It gave Mark Carney the opportunity to potentially become continue being, I should say, the Prime Minister of Canada. And the reason why the tariff should be stopped is so that Pierre Poilievre can get back in the game, which is a fascinating reason to go on an American program, especially when Canadians and Albertans are putting the bill. Because all of the travel for Danielle Smith and her entourage was covered by Alberta taxpayers. The whole trip, that was a fundraiser for an alt-right not university, was paid for by Alberta taxpayers, which is pretty bonkers. But it wasn't just the fundraiser part. Danielle Smith also appeared with the Real Talk PragerU program. That's just way too much fun for me. And she had some things to say there. And we're going to get to that. But before we do, I want to talk about the Ben Shapiro piece, because Danielle Smith said she wanted to make sure that Ben Shapiro knew that tariffs were very bad. Here's Ben Shapiro. In case you're unfamiliar with him, there's no video of the 25 whole minutes that she spent on stage with Ben Shapiro. But to get a sense of how Ben Shapiro feels about Canada, we were able to find this clip.
President Trump has basically proposed that we annex Canada, and I feel like they will greet us as liberators at this point because Justin Trudeau is just absolutely the worst. I've noticed that the Canadians have become quite humorless about this. By the way, it isn't just Canada. Don't worry. It's also Greenland. I mean, why the hell not? Let's expand the real estate holdings of the United States. Everything we're saying about Canada is true. It's a silly country that makes maple syrup, hockey, and annoying prime ministers. And by the way, it is funny. I'm sorry. It's not funny. Of course it's funny that Donald Trump called Justin Trudeau the governor of our 51st state. That's hilarious. I love it. It's great. And again, I'm not saying we should, I'm not saying Canadians should vote in American elections, God forbid, or something. I mean, we can annex it and then just call it an outlying territory or something. Like Puerto Rico.
Now, not into it. And, there's been some folks that have said, oh, he was just playing around. He was just making jokes. The general rule with the humor is that there's some funny that gets mixed into it. And, there's a lot to talk about, but making jokes about the fact that Puerto Rico can't vote, that's a bit of a sore spot for some Americans who do serve in the armed services and can't vote. So to try to say we should expand that is a pretty remarkable take. But getting back to Real Talk with PragerU. Danielle Smith went on the Real Talk podcast, and it's exactly, the whole thing runs for about an hour. And the whole thing is exactly as bad as you would think it would be, but there are a few points that we wanted to highlight that are actually a little bit worse. And one of them had to do with when Danielle Smith was asked about praised, I should say, because it was that hard-hitting kind of interview. So as she was praised for her stance on parental rights.
And one of the other things that I admire about your stamina is that you have been fighting for parental rights in your province. Yeah. This is something we also have in common. It has been a major issue to see the onslaught and attack on the innocence of our children when it came to chemically castrating and physically castrating kids who have been told that they're born in the wrong body. And you have done heroic work in your province on this specific subject. I think there was a bill that you passed. I'd love for you to share some of that.
Sure, I'll tell you about the 3 bills that we did, and we took a lot of time to consult on this to get the right pathway. Because again, when we started down this pathway, there was very little counter commentary in the media. And so we were just understanding that parents want to know what's going on with their kids. And we were seeing some terrible stories you probably saw them on social media as well, of young people who'd made transition decisions early, sometimes with a trusted adult that wasn't their parent, helping them along the way, and then having regret. And then transitioning
now,
backwards.
We're talking about 12, 13-year-olds who started taking chemicals with irreversible damage.
There's a case going on that I'm watching right now in California, exactly that. I believe the young girl began her journey at 13.
Chloe Cole. She's been on our show.
Yeah. And is now as an adult is looking for retribution, looking for someone to say, I was a child. Why did you let me do these things? And so I was very impacted by that. And I was looking at it through the perspective of a child. We do have a number of restrictions that we put on kids. We don't let kids drink. We don't let them do drugs. We don't let them smoke. We don't let them drive a car. We don't let them sign contracts until they are of an age that they can make a decision and understand the consequences of it. And so we've had some jurisprudence in our country where they've kind of determined when a kid gets to be around 15, 16 years old, they're able to start making some of their medical decisions. And so we decided that we would draw the line that anyone who is under age 16, if they want to change their pronouns or their name, that their parents have to approve that, because that's the beginning step. As soon as you start locking in some of that social transition, it very often leads to chemical transition, and then ban puberty blockers under age 16.
Now, one would think, one would be wrong, but one would think that Danielle Smith, having spent a year's worth of political capital pushing through the changes that she made to gender-affirming health care in Alberta, which are some of the worst in Canada, period, arguably the worst in Canada, period, one would think, having done speeches and interviews and allegedly had a hand in writing the legislation and consultation with her very, very select group of people that would agree with what she had to say. One would think that she would at least know what the policies and the realities of the situation were. But there's a lot that she got wrong. First of all, nobody is physically castrating kids. It doesn't happen anywhere in Canada. It's not a thing. You can't get bottom surgery until you're over the age of 18. So that's just straight up bullshit. That's just absolute garbage. So let's put that piece to bed right away. It's worth noting, Danielle Smith, she didn't say explicitly, oh yeah, no, I totally agree, they should not be physically castrating kids. But she didn't say that doesn't happen. And as the leader of a province who's traveling the world to try to represent the province, one would think that she might do a little bit of fact correction while trying to brag about her own policies. But like I said, she got her own policies wrong, because on the physical surgery part, she said the kids can't get surgery now in Alberta until they're age 16. That's not true. The rules that Danielle Smith made, the laws that she wrote to deny kids experiencing gender dysphoria access to healthcare by qualified healthcare practitioners, made it so there's no surgeries until they're 18. That includes top surgery, which would not be, by the way, castrating or limiting someone's ability to have kids. It's also worth remembering that the puberty blockers line is tired and old and false. Puberty blockers just block puberty from starting. When you go off of them, the puberty starts back up again. This is well documented. There's perhaps some conversations to be had around hormone replacement therapy, but puberty blockers in and of themselves just press pause. We've had multiple experts on the show who have addressed exactly that fact. So again, it's more disinformation that the Premier of Alberta is spreading on the taxpayer's dime, which is absolutely bonkers. The other bonkers piece about that clip is the amount of time that Danielle Smith talked about how social media influences her policy decisions. Now, I realize I say this as I'm live streaming to YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and a couple other places. Okay, but I have at no point, nor has anyone affiliated with the show, made the argument that policy decisions should be made based on what we say here on the show. We have made the argument that policy decisions should be made based on what experts have to say, and we certainly do our best to try to make sure that the folks that we have on the show are experts. So do with that what you will. I don't think Danielle Smith is writing any policies based on any breakdown episodes. I could be wrong, but I feel pretty safe about that. But it's pretty bonkers that she would say that she was concerned not because of actual data, actual experts, but because of what she was seeing on social media. The other thing that is worth pointing out is Danielle Smith said, kids, they can't drive a car. Well, kids could drive at 14. So you can get a learner's license at 14. So again, some clips. But the other clip that we wanted to share, because it's just so on the nose, is this one.
I think that bureaucracies are just designed to grow. I think that they're motivated by having more people, more money, more influence, more programs. And so it really is up to the politicians to find a way to identify the things that aren't working anymore and redirect those dollars to the priorities of the day. I don't know that anyone's found a perfect.
It is so bonkers to me. It is so bonkers to me. The lack of self-awareness that Danielle Smith displayed there, because, they always want more power. They always want more influence, as she's doing her influence tour in Florida to try to rub elbows with the elite of the far right social media world. Danielle Smith, who is running a budget that has a marked deficit. Danielle Smith, who has consistently had huge cabinets with associate ministers and secretary ministers. Danielle Smith is talking about everything that she's doing, and she's blaming the bureaucracies instead of looking in the mirror, which is wild. Just wanted to share that clip. But Danielle Smith absolutely took a victory lap on all of the things as well. She put a big shout out to Ben Shapiro's 10 million Facebook followers, all of whom I'm sure are absolutely real, and for reminding our American friends and allies of the damage a tariff dispute between the United States and Canada will have on both of our countries. She also put a big shout out to PragerU and Marissa Straight. Again, PragerU, who... Where was that? The Wikipedia thing. PragerU, who has misleading or inaccurate claims about topics such as slavery and racism in the United States, immigration, history, fascism. PragerU has been accused of promoting fascism, racism, sexism, and anti-LGBTQ policies. Well, Danielle Smith made sure that she tagged everybody and then shared the YouTube link from her social media. So here she is saying, hey, you know what? We really, really needed to make sure that we reached all of the Americans, which is why I'm sharing the YouTube link for a monetized channel with all of my Alberta and Canada followers. There's a little bit of dissonance there. But it wasn't just those sort of tepid victory laps that Danielle Smith took. Rob Anderson, right hand to the Premier of Alberta. Oh, he got himself spicy, he did. Direct advocacy of Canada's position by Ben Shapiro directly to his 10 million Republican Facebook followers, literally straight to Trump's base. And then it, of course, turns into the attack. I'm sure those self-proclaimed feminists, Nenshi, Mark Carney, Andrew Coyne, will continue to attack the strong woman doing the heavy lifting for them on influencing Republicans to change course on tariffs, hoping Eastern Canadians begin cluing in that it is conservatives getting, and he spelled shit wrong, there's an I and a T in it, done for this country on this file, while liberals have made us weak, dependent, and vulnerable. Trump will have a field day with Carney and the libs if he wins. Take it to the bank, said Rob Anderson. So proud of the fact that his premier was able to convince Ben Shapiro the tariffs are bad. Hey, that's a new position for Ben Shapiro, right? It's not like he said for years that tariffs are bad. Oh, it is exactly like he said for years that tariffs are bad. Going back to 2021, Ben Shapiro retweeted somebody who said, "You've been kidnapped." 30 minutes later, the kidnapper dumps you on the street because you won't stop talking about what? What is the one thing that in 2021 Ben Shapiro wanted people to know? He would talk about so much that his kidnappers would release him out of frustration. Quote, "Tariffs not only impose immense economic costs, but also fail to achieve their primary policy aims and foster political dysfunction along the way." So it's kind of weird. It's kind of strange that everybody is celebrating the tremendous victory by Danielle Smith, particularly Rob Anderson, who's trying to weaponize it into some sort of misogynistic thing in a really ham-handed and uncomfortable way. It's very strange that everybody's like, "Hey, look, we convinced Ben Shapiro of a thing that he's believed for literally years." But what is interesting, what is fascinating about the whole thing is Ben did have a few thoughts that he wanted to share coming out of his meeting with Danielle Smith. And some of them might sound a little bit Breitbarty.
This tariff program is actually propping up in Canada, which is the country that we are largely targeting, the worst person in Canadian politics right now, who's the current Prime Minister, Mark Carney. So Justin Trudeau, handsome Bernie Sanders, he is gone. He was replaced by Mark Carney, who's a Green New Deal type, a net zero type, and a person who's totally fine with reorienting trade away from the United States and toward China, which is the predictable result of tariff wars between the United States and Canada. Canada will start reorienting its economy toward China, which is precisely the opposite of the result, I think, that the Trump administration would like to see. Mark Carney is perfectly happy with all of this. See, here's the thing. When there was no trade war, when President Trump had just won, what we saw in the Canadian polling was that Pierre Poilievre, who was the head of the Canadian Conservative Party, was destroying the Liberal Party, just destroying it. This is why Justin Trudeau had to step out. He stepped out because he had basically become dead man walking, politically speaking. There was no shot that he was going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada. He replaced himself with Mark Carney. The Liberal Party put Mark Carney in place. And simultaneously, the talks about the tariff war and the trade war broke out. And Pierre Poilievre started to slide. And the reason he started to slide is because Mark Carney and the Liberal Party accused the Conservative Party of being in cahoots with President Trump on all of this. While President Trump was making jokes or perhaps half-serious remarks about Canada becoming the 51st state and territorial contiguity and all the rest of it, while that was happening, Mark Carney was gaining in the polls. Right now, Mark Carney has called a snap election that is set to take place in about 1 month. In that snap election, he is now running dead even with the Conservative Party and gaining momentum. So he is perfectly happy to increase the trade war. He wants the trade war. Number one, he's fine with a bigger relationship with China. Number two, he hates President Trump and is perfectly fine with using his opposition to Trump to jack his poll ratings up in Canada. None of this is salutary for the United States. We'd be much better off with Pierre Poilievre as the Prime Minister of Canada, a significantly friendlier government, a government that will be tougher on immigration, tougher on fentanyl, better on economics, better on social policy. Mark Carney is the...
And so we come full circle. Danielle Smith went to the U.S. to put forward some talking points. Ben Shapiro was already on the same page with tariffs, but it sure seems that he picked up a few lines from Dani that she'd already tested on her Breitbart run. But Dani was quick to pivot. So quick to pivot. Because there were bigger things to be talking about. If the election is already lost, if it's too late, if you can't stop the Carney party, well, what do you do next?
I'm curious to know if the premier is a closet Western separatist or secessionist. I saw a question from Rick Bell that says we could be facing a referendum given your demands to Mark Carney. And, you know, it's hard not to notice your contempt for Team Canada.
Well, I disagree. I mean, I was just down in the U.S. With my Team Canada jersey on, talking about everything from critical minerals in British Columbia, Quebec, and Manitoba, to uranium in Saskatchewan, to potash and everything in between, and cars and everything in between. That's my job to do, is to make sure that the Americans understand just how important our trade relationship is. So I sort of reject the premise of your question, but we do have mechanisms for referendum in our province. We have a citizen-initiated process where if you get enough petition signatures, you can force a vote. We've seen that before. Fluoride has gone to referendum in Calgary during municipal elections. We've seen a number of different other municipalities take that up. There has been a referendum on trying to end equalization. The Fair Deal panel proposed a referendum on a couple of other issues, and so I'll after the election's over, I will do I'm calling it now the What's Next panel. We just want to go around the province, see how people are feeling, and see if there are any other referendum issues that they want us to put on the table. But there is a process for individuals to put those questions.
I love how the question is, hey, you seem to be supporting Alberta leaving Confederation. What's up with that? Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. And Danielle Smith's response is, whoa, 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 whoa. I love Canada. I had a Team Canada jersey that I definitely wasn't wearing in any of the interviews that I did. And I was definitely maybe saying mean things about the current Prime Minister of Canada, at least on some of those Team Canada interviews that I did, cough, Breitbart, cough. I would never, ever initiate a referendum about Alberta secession. But hey, if you want to, here's the process. It's bonkers that she literally pivots from, I believe in Canada, it's my job to protect Canada. But if you wanted to put a round in the head of Confederation, here's how you would do it. And it works, by the way. We've seen it work. So, you know, if you do it, hey, I guess that's just democracy. And if you're thinking that it was a one-off, it wasn't.
What would you say to those who criticize you for sort of entertaining the idea of Alberta independence as Canada faces a trade war and threats of annexation from the U.S.?
Well, I love Canada, and I want Canada to work. I've been on Team Canada from the beginning. It's part of the reason why I've been relentlessly going to the United States and trying to advocate for all of our industries, for all of Canada, in every venue I possibly can. But I'm also Premier of Alberta, and quite frankly, at some point, Canada has to start working for Alberta, and it's not right now. We have a number of policies that came in over the last 10 years that have been damaging to Alberta prosperity. It's been damaging to our freedom as a province. And if they persist, it is going to continue a dysfunctional relationship that harms Alberta. So I put forward the 9 major policies that I think have to be repealed after the next election. Unfortunately, the current Prime Minister, despite what he said to me privately when he was here, has now gone public saying he supports export taxes, he supports Bill C-69, he supports emissions caps. That is moving in the wrong direction. So we will get through this election. We'll see who ends up winning, and I will continue to advocate for those. And that's part of the reason why I will do a What's Next panel. We did that when when my predecessor came in to hear some of the concerns that Albertans had about how to repair the relationship with Canada at that time.
Can I just say, as a huge Aaron Sorkin fan and as a huge fan of The West Wing, for Danielle Smith to do a What's Next panel hurts me personally. If you're familiar with the show, you'll understand why. But that's the next pivot point for Danielle Smith. And she said also in other interviews that if she hears at her What's Next panel, where she goes and hears from Albertans what they want, if she hears from them that they want a referendum, well, then she might have to consider doing a referendum on Alberta secession, which is, again, bonkers. I'll say it for the record and to be clear. If you are somebody who's saying, I live in Alberta and Canada is treating me so unfairly that I want to leave. And I don't just want to leave. I want to leave and I want to take the whole province with me. I want to take Alberta out of Confederation. I want to disregard all of the treaties that predate and supersede the formation of Alberta as a province. I want to take my ball and go home. If I don't get exactly what I want, then you're selling your country out. You're a coward and you're a traitor. Sorry. That's the reality. We have systems that we work within to initiate change. And if those systems aren't yielding the results that you like, you can work to change the systems. You can work harder within the systems. But as soon as you say, I'm going to completely throw away all the principles that make a society function because you're being selfish, you're lazy, you're a coward, and a traitor. On that note, Preston Manning wrote a new column. And I'm not saying that this applies to Preston. I'm just going to read a quote from his column. Voters, particularly in Central and Atlantic Canada, need to recognize that a vote for the Carney Liberals is a vote for Western secession. Now, I want to be clear. Regardless of who wins any election, I'll still be a Canadian. And I hope that most people would recognize that we are stronger as a country. And, you know, it's wild to me that Danielle Smith will do a charm tour and a charm offensive all across the United States, going to all of the right-wing people, when the president of that country is actively threatening the sovereignty of our country. She'll go and she'll play nice and she'll try to put on the charm and she'll agree with their little ludicrous talking points that are in no way based in reality. But when it comes to dealing with the rest of Canada, how does she choose to behave? She chooses to behave exactly like Trump. Here's my list of demands. And if you don't give me everything that I want, I'm going to do a What's Next panel. And I'm just going to keep repeating to people that they can always do the dirty work of the citizen-led referendum to put secession on a ballot, because I don't have the stones to take that position myself. If that's what Danielle Smith wants to say, then she should just say it out loud. But speaking of Trump and the tariffs, there was a bit of an event that happened. Donald Trump made a big tariff announcement, and it gets confusing. And a lot of people have been sort of trying to make sense of, okay, so what exactly is going on with the tariffs? And in no surprise whatsoever, we're seeing politicians on both sides of the political spectrum doing their very, very best to split all of the hairs in the most finest way that they possibly can to create the most positive narrative for themselves. So we're going to spend a few minutes talking about Trump's tariffs and what's actually going on. So what did Trump announce? He announced a blanket minimum baseline tariff of 10% on all goods entering the United States, with higher rates for countries that he claimed have ripped off the United States. Now, this is all predicated on the idea that if a country sells more to the United States than they buy from the United States, they're being ripped off. There's some problems with that. First of all, it's a fascinating argument for net zero economics. Do with that what you will. But there's also some other pieces that we got to talk about. Let's talk about the Canadian tariffs, though. So on March 12th, the U.S. imposed a 25% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum imports. On March 26th, Trump signed an executive order to impose 25% tariffs on all cars and light trucks imported to the U.S. The tariffs will have come into effect with collection beginning on April 3rd. Now, this is where it gets weird, and this is where we have to talk a little bit about a number of agreements. So you've heard people probably talk about CUSMA. Danielle Smith references it in several different places. And it gets weird real quick because there's 3 different names for the one agreement. Now, it's important to understand that when we're talking about CUSMA and the other 3 different names, which I will list off in just a second here, we're talking about the agreement that exists between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. This agreement, effectively replaced NAFTA. So when we're talking about these 3 different things, you can consider them, it might be easy to think about them as like NAFTA 2.0. And yes, to be clear, President Trump was president when this agreement was negotiated. And the new agreement has 3 different names. It goes by, in Canada, it goes by CUSMA, or CUSMA. In the United States, it goes by USMCA. And in Mexico, it goes by TMEC, because all of the various countries put their own names first just to make things confusing. So what happened on April 3rd? Trump expanded the trade war on a global front. This is important. Announcing a minimum 10% tariff, like I said, on all goods entering the United States from anywhere in the world. But he included this bizarre sort of sliding scale for particular countries. The EU was hit with a 20% tariff, but the highest tariff went to the country of Lesotho. And I apologize if I'm not getting the name of that country right. The highest tariff went to Lesotho. This graph here from CBC was with 50%. Now, this is where it gets kind of bonkers, because Lesotho imports 0.01% into the U.S. That's how much stuff they add in consideration of the entire U.S. economy. They are a tiny little landlocked country in the sort of sandwiched, they're like the donut hole, if you will, of South Africa. And it's important to kind of take into context when we're talking about Lesotho, the economic powerhouse that they are not. No disrespect. Lesotho is a country that ships approximately 0.01% of its products to the U.S., has a population of just over 2 million, of which almost half live beneath the poverty line. It has an export economy that's largely based on manufacturing garments and mining diamonds that are sold in the U.S. They have a literacy rate of 81%, which is actually higher than the U.S. It's 79%. It's also partially the inspiration for Wakanda from Marvel. So that's kind of cool. But here's the big thing to take away. The biggest things that Lesotho exports, like I said, are clothes and diamonds, which the U.S. then buys. The U.S. not having a whole lot of diamonds. And this is where it gets complicated, because the U.S. buys clothing from Lesotho for very cheap. The companies that buy clothing from Lesotho buy it for very cheap. And they're able to do that because, like I said, half the population lives beneath the poverty line. There are no shortages of products that the U.S. is able to get for very, 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 very cheap, because they're getting them from countries where people make dollars a day. And if you say to those countries, hey, we are totally exploiting your economic situation so that we can get t-shirts and shoes and socks for way cheaper than we could get them if we made them here. But for everything that we buy from you, you have to buy the same from us. Otherwise, we're going to put tariffs on it, is absolutely ridiculous. That's not how any of this works. You can't net zero economies like that and expect to have the same price of goods that you are enjoying currently. Because the counter argument would be, okay, cool. Well, what's the minimum wage in Lesotho? Because if we're going to talk about the buying power of the people who live there, we should make it equal, right? So either Donald Trump should mandate that the minimum wage in Lesotho goes up to whatever it is in the United States right now, or he should drop the minimum wage in the United States to match what's going on in Lesotho. You see how silly and ridiculous it gets, how quickly that happens? That's what this is so bonkers about. But what does it mean for Canada? Well, nothing really changed. The reality is Canadian goods are still being tariffed by the U.S. That list, like I said, includes aluminum and steel being tariffed at 25%, cars being tariffed at 25%, and 10% tariff on energy and potash. But this is for, and this is where it gets weird, non-CUSMA, Canadian, U.S., Mexican agreement related products, which makes this all the more confusing. Currently, roughly 40% of exports from Canada are CUSMA compliant. And finding a specific list is just about impossible because each manufacturer of every good has to demonstrate that they meet the requirements to be exempt under CUSMA. But it's 40%. It's roughly 40% of the goods that come out of Canada right now that are CUSMA compliant. And that's a problem because the short takeaway is nothing new was applied to Canada, but the U.S. trade war increased. It expanded to becoming a global trade war, except for a couple of countries, including, gosh, Russia. I don't know why Donald Trump would not want to target Russia, but he's gonna target the good people of Lesotho. I don't know if he has some sort of relationship with anybody in Russia. That would be purely speculative, but Russia got a pass. And there are huge consequences. Ontario is feeling the pain in very real ways right now. Automaker Stellantis has confirmed it's shutting down its assembly plant in Windsor, Ontario for 2 weeks, largely because of the U.S. tariffs on imported vehicles. Roughly 4,500 people work in various jobs and trades at the Canadian Border City factory, where a bunch of Chrysler and Dodge products are made. Roughly 3,200 Canadians will be impacted by the decision of this one factory. So there's a lot of Canadians who are being directly hurt by this. So what does the Premier of Alberta do? She declares a big win and tried to take the credit. Here's her statement. Today was an important win for Canada and Alberta, as it appears the United States has decided to uphold the majority of the free trade agreement, CUSMA, between our two nations. It also appears that this will continue to be the case until after the Canadian federal election has concluded and the newly elected Canadian government is able to renegotiate CUSMA with the U.S. administration. This is precisely what I have been advocating for from the U.S. administration for months. It means that the majority of goods sold into the United States from Canada will have no tariffs applied to them, including 0% tariffs on energy, mineral, agriculture products, uranium, seafood, potash, and a host of other Canadian goods. And no, it's not a majority because, as I said, the best information that's available is 40% of the goods that are sold from Canada to the U.S. are CUSMA compliant. 40%. That means 60% are not, which means the majority of goods are currently not. Now, there's the argument, and I have to make sure that I make this clear, there is the argument that any of the manufacturers of any of those goods can take steps to demonstrate that their products are CUSMA compliant, in which case they would be tariff exempt. But they're not currently. And that's important because facts are a thing. It's also important to point out that as much as Danielle Smith said Canada will have no tariffs, 0% tariffs on energy, minerals, agricultural products, uranium, seafood, potash, and a host of other Canadian goods, the White House actually issued a fact sheet that directly contradicted that. For Canada and Mexico, the existing fentanyl migration IEEPA orders remain in effect and are unaffected by this order. This means USMCA compliant goods will continue to see a 0% tariff. Non-USMCA, because they're using the American name first, compliant goods will see a 25% tariff, and non-USMCA compliant energy and potash will see a 10% tariff. In the event the existing fentanyl migration, i.e. EPA orders, are terminated, USMCA compliant goods would continue to receive preferential treatment, while non-USMCA compliant goods will be subject to a 12% reciprocal tariff. So even the White House is like, oh no, we will still tariff the potash. If it is not demonstrated to be USMCA compliant, we will tariff the potash. So there's some problems there. But where it gets interesting and wild, and we know we're living in the upside down, is that the White House's whole thing was talking about the fentanyl and the immigration, which is, and I want to be clear here because let me be clear. Fentanyl, illicit fentanyl is bad. It's not good. It's a problem. There is a question and there is a conversation to be had about the scale of that problem at the Canadian border. Now, this is not to say, because the game that gets played here, as soon as you say, it's not that big of a problem at the Canadian border. As soon as you say that, everybody goes, oh, you're saying fentanyl is not a problem, and that's really horrible because people died from fentanyl. And yes, that happens. And yes, it's tragic. And yes, again, illicit fentanyl is a problem. Illicit drugs, street drugs that are cut with all kinds of crap are problems. Taking nothing away from that. But it was wild that there's former Premier Jason Kenney who called out the great lie that is fentanyl at the border. From blows my mind I'm reading this. From former Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney. Remember when we were told that massive fentanyl exports to the U.S. triggered the economic national security tariffs 2 months ago? The MAGA North types are so gullible. I assume, I don't know if he's talking about Danielle Smith. I don't know. They bought that hook, line, and sinker. Well, new data confirms that only 0.13% of fentanyl seized in the U.S. can be traced to Canada by U.S. law enforcement. Maybe that's why President Trump hasn't mentioned the dreaded wave of Canadian fentanyl exports to the U.S. for 2 months, because it's pure fiction. Instead, his target seems to be the Canadian dairy quotas that he agreed to in CUSMA, a.k.a. the biggest and best trade agreement ever. It's wild. It's wild that I'm agreeing with Jason Kenney. But that is not reflective of a political alignment with Jason Kenney. That is reflective and should be interpreted as a huge red flag for how far down the rabbit hole Danielle Smith and the UCP government have gone. Because they have bought that fentanyl at the border in Canada is a huge problem and it's killing millions of Americans. It's 0.13%. 0.13%. That means that when we're talking about fentanyl coming into the United States, we are talking about 99.87% not having anything to do with Canada. So the tariffs have nothing to do with fentanyl. The tariffs have nothing to do with immigration. Tariffs have a lot of things to do with a lot of other things. Mr. Kenney might be right about the dairy quotas. But the fact that progressives and centrists are finding themselves going, well, no, Jason Kenney, he's got a really good point there. That speaks volumes for how far Danielle Smith and the UCP have taken the window of rationality and validated Trump's concerns. You're never going to be able to appease someone whose concerns are entire fiction. Which brings us to the next piece, which we have to talk about. Because as Danielle Smith is declaring, big win for Alberta and Canada. Oh, we escaped unscathed. No new tariffs for Alberta and Canada, yes. The myopic view comes sharply into focus because, as it turns out, Alberta and Canada operate in a global economy. And when Donald Trump initiates a global trade war, there are, in fact, global consequences. It's worth remembering that the Alberta budget projected to be a little bit of deficit. We're going to have to borrow some money to make the ends meet. And that's predicated on oil prices being at a certain level. Well, they've dropped substantially. These are the numbers that we pulled up for the oil prices as of today. And it's really, really not good. You can see that just in the last couple of days, oil prices have dropped massively. The WTI has dropped the better part of 10 cents. Did I say 10 cents? I meant $10. The Western Canadian Select has done very much the same thing. It's not good. That means that the royalties that Albertans and Canadians collect when oil is sold is going to be significantly, significantly less. And that's a big problem. It's certainly not, as Danielle Smith would want to call it, a big win. Moving on from there. It's going to be a long show tonight. I apologize in advance. As you know, we've been away from the live shows for a little while, partially because there's this whole little injunction thing, but also because we spent the month of March trying to highlight the coal situation, which we maybe the province of Alberta got a little bit of insight, a little bit of explanation as to what's going on, because people have had a lot of questions, especially when we've been talking about Grassy Mountain. One of the pieces that people have been trying to make sense about, and it was a question that came up in many of the interviews that we did with the people that we did interviews with on the coal stuff during the month of March, was why is Northback now doing exploratory drilling in Grassy Mountain? Because they had mapped out a whole project based on what were we going to get for coal out of that mountain. They had mapped out potential yields. They had mapped out how long they were going to be getting those yields for. And one of the questions was, why would that change? They knew all the numbers beforehand. Now all of a sudden they're doing all of this new exploratory drilling. What is going on with that? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And that was a piece that people were very, very confused about. Well, it looks like there may be a little bit of clarification that was offered by Danielle Smith. She recently had a fundraiser, all about the fundraising, our premier is, a fundraiser and a bit of a town hall in Cardston, Siksika. And we maybe got sent a little bit of video about one of the questions that was asked at that event. And as soon as it's finished processing, we'll play it for you. So I guess this is where I vamp for half a second. Because like I said, one of the big questions has been, why are they doing this drilling? Northback has been described by Brian Jean, Minister of Energy, as an advanced project. He said that Northback and the Grassy Mountain mine that Northback is pursuing will be exempt from the new rules that the government is reportedly going to be putting in place in regards to the types of coal mining that can happen. You've heard Danielle Smith say no more open pit mining, no more mountaintop removal mining. And there's been some very real questions about that, because while Danielle Smith has been saying there's not going to be any more open pit mining or mountaintop removal mining, at the same time, Brian Jean has been saying, well, new projects. There won't be any of that with new projects. Now, it's important to highlight as we go into this clip, Danielle Smith has not been the most consistent, let's say, with in the UCP in general, have not been the most consistent with what are the plans, what are the reasons. So take all of what we're about to play for a grain of salt, but it might offer a little bit of insight.
So this town area is an agricultural hub quality of our water is crucial to upholding our life down here in southern Alberta. The Eastern Slopes coal mine has the capacity to inject us with psyllium. It would have a knock-on effect to our industries down here. Will you promise the people in this room that we will hold off on the coal mines to preserve our way of life?
Just leave them out of there.
Well,
that's where our headwaters are coming from.
Well, what we have said is that there can be no mountaintop removal of mines.
No
there can be
no mines. It should be up there.
Well, look, I mean,
it's in our headwaters, Danielle.
I appreciate that there are different opinions on this.
It was shut down, and now you guys have turned it around and
I
opened
would
it
say
up.
that there were always 4 advanced mining projects.
If you have a question, you're welcome to get in the line. In fairness, I'd love to have the Premier answer the question.
I think we have to have a bit of a reality check. If we want to move to a new economy that requires batteries, there's 50 different minerals that have to be dug out of the ground. From uranium to copper to nickel to lithium to cobalt to potentially metallurgical coal to make steel. And I know there's been an anti-mining movement that has shut down a lot of our development in the entire country. But if we're going to be an economic superpower, we have to find a way to develop our resources in a way that protects the environment. And that's what we're going to do. Removal and strip mining, and it rains, that's when selenium can get into the water. That's why we are asking these companies to use underground mining techniques so that you don't remove mountaintops, so that you don't do strip mining, so that you don't have that impact on water. That's what our expectation is develop the resource in a way that uses new techniques so that you have a minimal impact on the environment. And so I understand that the company in Crow's Nest Pass is doing some core samples.
So it's interesting because the implication of what Danielle Smith said there, especially towards the end, first of all, I got to say, I love the lady in the background who's like, that's bullshit. That's wishful thinking. I would just love to send her a Tim's card. But Danielle Smith's implication there is that the reason why the mining company Northback is doing the drilling is because they're looking for maybe other minerals that might be valuable, maybe more valuable than the coal, but they're also looking for the pathway to see whether or not they can do the underground mining. And again, I'll take it with a grain of salt because it's Danielle Smith spitballing at a town hall and, chemtrails and all that. But it was a fascinating little development, which brings us to the main event because we got to talk. It's been difficult here at the breakdown for a couple of different reasons. One of them was that little injunction. There have been some very complex stories that have happened that are potentially, he said cautiously, related to the injunction that was levied against us that was then unlevied. Yay. Which is why we're able to do a live show tonight. But there's a conversation that we have to have about making sense of the situation with the former AHS CEO. This is Athena Mentzelopoulos, and I've learned that as long as I don't look at what's written in front of me, then I can say her name much better. So we're going to have a conversation over the next couple of weekends where we talk about what is going on with the lawsuit. What are the claims that are in the lawsuit? What is all of the stuff that's happening with this lawsuit? And in order to start to make sense of it, we're going to try to work our way through things. We're going to try to break them down a little bit. So to start with, let's go all the way back to January 8th, 2025. Because on January 8th, 2025, the government of Alberta announced that they were making some changes. They announced that Chris Eagle had been appointed as the new board chair, president, and CEO of Acute Care Alberta. Now, I probably would do well at this point to say this whole section tonight, I do not claim to represent anyone but myself in the show. So there, get that out of the way. But they announced that Chris Eagle was going to be the new chairman, interim president, and CEO of Acute Care Alberta. This was one of the new bodies that Smith had created to help disintegrate the healthcare system and relegate Alberta Health Services to the role of one of many service providers instead of the body running healthcare in Alberta. But there were a few things that were important in that announcement, and they became really important over the coming days. Quietly buried in the announcement was this paragraph. To help support Dr. Eagle's work and to lead AHS through its transition from a regional health authority to a hospital-based service provider, Andre Tremblay, Deputy Minister of Health, has been appointed interim president and CEO of AHS. Acute care is the most complex part of the healthcare system, and it's critical that we have the right leadership in place to see this work through and make positive changes to the healthcare system for Albertans now and into the future. I want to extend my sincerest gratitude to Athana Mentzelopoulos for the work she has done during her time leading Alberta Health Services. So to be clear, the government framed the departure of Athana Mentzelopoulos 1 year into her 4-year contract and the placement of Tremblay as a necessity to ensure that the new Acute Care Alberta CEO received the support that he needed. And at that point in time, Tremblay was filling the role of Deputy Minister, President of AHS, and CEO of AHS. That same announcement also included the somewhat contradictory news that Tremblay would be overseeing the recruitment of a permanent president and CEO for Acute Care Alberta, and that the AHS Board of Directors would begin the search for a permanent president and CEO immediately. So that's kind of strange. It's also a little bit unusual that Tremblay, while being the CEO for AHS, would be hiring the CEO for Acute Care Alberta at the same time as AHS was looking for a permanent CEO for AHS. It's all terribly confusing. The next day, CBC covered the story, and CBC talked about the fact that it appeared that the president and CEO had departed, and they were very particular about the words that they used. CBC referred to a statement that they received from Adriana LaGrange saying, Athana provided strong leadership in her time as president and CEO. We thank her for her efforts and wish her well. In the same statement, the provincial government wouldn't confirm whether or not Mentzelopoulos was fired. Later that month, on January 31st, the government of Alberta announced that they had dismissed the entire AHS board and had appointed Andre Tremblay to the role of official administrator for AHS, replacing the board. At that time, he was going to remain in his role as Deputy Minister of Health as well. So to recap, as of January 31st, Andre Tremblay was Adriana LaGrange's right-hand man at the Ministry of Health. He also occupied all of the senior positions, board, president, and CEO of AHS leadership as well. So if you needed a clear touch point to go, oh yeah, no, AHS was being completely controlled by the provincial government in every conceivable way, as of January 31st, that was very much the case. But it appears to have gone back further. Also in that press release was the news that the Ministry of Health would be taking over responsibility for the search of a new permanent president and CEO of Alberta Health Services. So instead of the board of AHS looking for the new permanent president and CEO, it was now going to be the Ministry of Health, who Andre Tremblay was still the deputy. It gets, again, there's a lot going on. That brings us all the way to February 12th, because on February 12th, that fired CEO, it turns out she was fired, filed a lawsuit suing the provincial government, AHS, and explicitly naming Adriana LaGrange for $1.7 million for effectively wrongful dismissal. And what was alleged in that lawsuit made all of the headlines. And to be clear, to be very, very clear, what is in the lawsuit is alleged and has yet to be tested in a court of law. Also, to be clear, consider this part one of our conversation about this, because there's a whole bigger piece that we got to talk about, because the government responded, and then Athena Metzelopoulos' lawyer responded, and then there's more responses to the responses. We're going to talk about all of that. But the documents filed contain and detailed staggering allegations that both Athena and the AHS board had been fired ostensibly to cover up multiple investigations into possible corruption at AHS involving at least 2 former employees and a surgical group owned in part by an Edmonton businessman whose name had been in the news for a number of reasons by that point, one of them being he's currently suing me for $6 million. And that businessman is Sam Mraiche. In her lawsuit, Athena alleges that she was fired not by the AHS board, but by Andre Tremblay himself. She also alleges that she was not fired because of a realignment, as was indicated in the press release from the government, but for a whole list of the other reasons. One of those reasons was Tremblay purported to terminate Metzelopoulos' employment with AHS because Metzelopoulos had authorized an internal investigation and forensic audit into various AHS contracts and AHS procurement processes, including contracts with private healthcare providers and suppliers, and had supported a proper due diligence assessment and costings for contracts with several private surgical facilities whose principals were connected to various government officials. AHS had also undertaken an investigation into potential conflicts of interests around CSF, or chartered surgical facilities, and other AHS procurement issues, including an unfulfilled $70 million contract between AHS and MH Care for children's acetaminophen. She also alleged, and I'm going to do a lot of reading tonight because I have to. She also alleged throughout 2024, Metzelopoulos had been repeatedly subject to interference and pressure from various Government of Alberta officials, including the Premier's then Chief of Staff, Marshall Smith, to sign on commitments for new chartered surgical facilities and approve an extension for Alberta Surgical Group, despite significant concerns within AHS around the true ownership and potential costs of the CSFs, and concerns over the significantly increased cost of the ASG contract when compared to other private contractors, and also compared to internal AHS costing estimates. During 2024, Metzelopoulos also learned that Alberta Surgical Group was being promoted by former MLA Doug Horner, and that ASG had somehow been awarded a 2-year chartered surgical facility contract, despite having been uncompetitive in the initial RFP process for CSF contracts. Athena also alleged that Danielle Smith's former chief of staff, Marshall Smith, was trying to pull strings to ensure his guy, Jitendra Prasad, was going to be taking over contracting on behalf of the government of Alberta. In early 2024, Marshall Smith told Metzelopoulos that an individual named Jitendra Prasad was his guy, air quotes, was his guy, and that Prasad had been put in place at Alberta Health to make sure the government could, again, quote, get contracting right, end quote. Despite Shortly after this discussion, Prasad contacted Mentzelopoulos and advised that he was close to Marshall Smith and he was working to set up a new healthcare contracting group within Alberta Health. For her part, Mentzelopoulos was uncomfortable with the inference that Prasad would be taking some level of direction from Marshall Smith and potentially the Premier's office on AHS procurement and contract issues that were specific to AHS and that fell within Mentzelopoulos' mandate as president and CEO. So there's some concerns that are being voiced in this lawsuit that this individual, Jitendra Prasad, allegedly, was being positioned by Marshall Smith, allegedly, I'm just going to use that word so much tonight, to be in charge of procurement and contracting for the whole thing, the whole enchilada. And that was going to impede or limit the way that Athena Mentzelopoulos could do her job. Mentzelopoulos also alleged that internal AHS investigations had uncovered some significant concerns with Mr. Prasad. Prasad retired briefly from AHS in April 2022 before becoming a contractor for AHS, and then returned as an AHS employee in the position of Chief Program Officer and later Special Advisor for AHS Contracts Procurement and Supply Management, or CPSM. So Contracts Procurement Supply Management is CPSM. From October of 2022 to December of 2023, before then being seconded from AHS to Alberta Health. But Prasad had an MH Care Medical email address, jprasad@mhcaremedical.com, in November of 2022, just before the then Minister of Health directed AHS to enter into a contract with MH Care for a $70 million children's acetaminophen purchase order and supply agreement. And Prasad may have also been retained or otherwise contracted by persons who were involved with the CSFs and other AHS procurement contracts in and after 2022. So the allegations there are that this Jitendra Prasad was simultaneously working for the company that benefited from the $70 million children's medication purchase, and he was the one assigning, allegedly, the contracts to that organization. So he's the person making the decision about who gets the money, and he's working for the person who gets the money, allegedly. The chartered surgical facility concerns allegedly continued with Mentzelopoulos emailing senior government officials, including Tremblay. She then raised the concern that too many of them look the same. She then raised the concern that ASG was projected to exceed the contract value by almost $3.5 million in billings, but was also being projected to not deliver the required number of surgical procedures under its contract with AHS. So, in the lawsuit, Athena Mentzelopoulos alleges that she was worried that the Alberta Surgical Group contract was worth more than what was being projected, and they weren't actually delivering the correct number of surgical procedures. And this brings us to the part that I definitely did not see coming, because Marshall Smith allegedly tried to have me fired from my role as a paramedic. Not just me, but others as well. Reading from the statement of claim. During the summer of 2024, Mentzelopoulos was again contacted by Marshall Smith, who advised Mentzelopoulos that, quote, powerful people, end quote, were upset and angry about the Twitter feed of an AHS employee, Nate Pike, an AHS paramedic, who was apparently posting criticism of government while on duty. I'm just going to keep reading. Smith alleged that a complaint and lawsuit were going to be filed against Mr. Pike. Mentzelopoulos asked Smith if he was trying to tell her that AHS had to fire Mr. Pike. Smith replied that Mr. Pike was your employee and you're going to look very bad and there would be consequences. Mentzelopoulos advised Smith that she would not fire Mr. Pike, but after discussions, she contacted AHS leadership and advised them to speak to Mr. Pike about not tweeting while at work. I'm not going to comment on that junk. This type of call from Smith was not unique, as Mraiche had previously been pressured by Tremblay via text messages to terminate purported critics of government, including Carmel Steinke, Jeremy Thale, and Sherry Kashuba. In support of this pressure from Tremblay, the chief of staff of Minister Lagrange sent Mraiche a screenshot of the allegedly offensive tweet that had been liked by one of these individuals. Later during the summer, Marshall Smith again spoke to Mraiche, this time about another Twitter feed called Hansard the Cat that was apparently critical of the government. Smith outlined a number of steps, including private detectives, lawyers, and apparently hackers that were being used to discover the identity of the persons posting under the Hansard the Cat name. All of this is very bonkers. The only thing that I'll say about all of that is I find it fascinating and somewhat curious that the chief of staff to the Premier of Alberta would somehow allegedly know what my work schedule was. Allegedly. That's kind of bonkers. The summer wore on, and as Mraiche was allegedly pressured to ensure that Alberta's surgical group was taken care of, her concerns seemingly were increasing. Again, from the statement of claim, after meeting with ASG, Mraiche undertook a further review of existing ASG contracts and noted significant differences in the ASG contract compared to other AHS procurement contracts. Among the issues, she noted that the ASG rates were higher than other comparable private service providers, and that AHS was potentially paying ASG for services that were not being used. She continued to have serious concerns about the proposed rates and costs for a new ASG contract and felt that AHS needed more information before continuing negotiations. And the stakes allegedly got higher and higher. Mraiche then advised the AHS board about the potential concerns over the existing ASG contract and the renewal negotiations and the resulting pause on other CSF negotiations. Before that briefing, Mraiche was told privately by a board member to be, quote, very careful, end quote, about what she was doing and that she needed to potentially be cautious about her personal safety given some of the people potentially involved behind the scenes. Out of an abundance of caution, Mraiche contacted AHS Protective Services for a risk assessment. AHS Protective Services undertook a risk assessment and advised Mraiche that she was unlikely to be at risk of any physical harm, but the individuals involved in ASG would likely apply political pressure to have her terminated from AHS if she if she threatened their financial interests. According to the same statement of claim, the internal review of the ASG contract started in September, and the pressure allegedly continued to build. On September 21st, 2024, Mraiche received another call from Marshall Smith, who wanted to know the status of the negotiations of the CSFs in Red Deer and Lethbridge. Smith advised Mraiche that there were serious businessmen who were unhappy with the delays in negotiations, and they needed AHS to approve the CSFs in order to secure financing. Mraiche explained the reason for the delay, but Smith ended the conversation with a comment that CSF principals were serious people, do not mess with them, end quote. On October 18th, Adriana Lagrange issued a ministerial directive that mandated that Alberta Surgical Group have their contract extended at rates set by the minister. It also initiated a gag order on public statements on chartered for surgical facilities. Now, we received a copy a while back. We received a copy of that order. So what we're showing you here is not, in fact, the included in the statement of claim by Athena Mraiche. This is something that we received separately, but it correlates, it lines up very much with what is mentioned in Athena's statement of claim. But what Athena alleges is much worse, because according to her, the point person on handling the CSF contracts was, again, Jitendra Prasad. Also in October, a media inquiry allegedly revealed this stunning allegation. In October 2024, AHS also received a media inquiry regarding the AHS purchase of children's ibuprofen and acetaminophen that included questions about any business AHS had with MH Care Medical and any other companies owned by Sam Mraiche. The media inquiry was sent to Prasad, Jitendra Prasad, presumably, to draft a reply because Mentzelopoulos had been told by Alberta Health that Prasad was the person who negotiated the AHS purchasing contract for children's acetaminophen and knew, quote, everything, end quote, about the deal. Several days later, Mentzelopoulos received the proposed reply drafted by Prasad and apparently reviewed by staff in Alberta Health and by the Premier's office. The response indicated that AHS did not have any contract with MH Care and that the children's ibuprofen acetaminophen contract has been between AHS and a Turkish company, Atabey Pharmaceuticals, a statement that Mentzelopoulos knew was false. Individuals involved in the preparation of the draft reply and the underlying information were then placed on administrative leave, although the administrative leave of one individual employed by Alberta Health was reversed purportedly at the direction of the Premier's office. And this is where the wheels really come off. As a result, Mentzelopoulos requested information from AHS finance officials and learned that AHS had purchased approximately $614 million in supplies and services from MH Care and other companies affiliated with Sam Mraiche, including the 2022-2023 contract for children's ibuprofen acetaminophen. Mentzelopoulos further learned that the $70 million for purchase of children's ibuprofen and acetaminophen had been paid up front and likely at a significantly increased price, and that AHS had been directed by the then Minister of Health to make the purchase against the recommendations that AHS had specifically provided to the then Minister of Health, which was in turn provided to the Premier's office. As a result of Prasad's demonstrably false draft media response and the subsequent analysis by Mentzelopoulos and her staff of contracts between AHS and MH Care and other companies affiliated with Sam Mraiche, Mentzelopoulos initiated an external forensic audit by the law firm Borden, Ladner, Gervais, LLP in early November 2024. AHS then disclosed the fact of its investigation and external audit to the Auditor General. The Auditor General's office indicated that it had received other requests to investigate MH Care and wanted a dedicated briefing on the results of the AHS investigation and audit. The briefing was delayed, but eventually scheduled for January 10th, 2025, being 2 days after Mentzelopoulos was purportedly terminated on the Zoom call by Deputy Health Minister Tremblay. Only a short time later in December, Mentzelopoulos allegedly met with the AHS board. Mentzelopoulos updated the board of directors, including Tremblay, who also sat as an AHS board member on the investigation and forensic audit. As part of the briefing on the forensic audit, Mentzelopoulos advised that investigators had discovered that Prasad had an email account with MH Care during at least part of the time that he was employed by AHS, and during the time he had been negotiating the contract with MH Care for the supply of the children's ibuprofen acetaminophen. As a result of this disclosure, the AHS board recommended that the investigation and audit be expanded and that Mentzelopoulos should consider bringing the matter to the attention of the RCMP. That's a pretty bold claim. According to the statements of claim, Mentzelopoulos began to raise their concerns directly with MH Care. On Friday, December 20th, 2024, AHS sent a letter to MH Care Medical regarding the $70 million supply agreement between AHS and MH Care for the provision of children's acetaminophen. The letter outlined concerns AHS had over the supply agreement and advised MH Care that A, it was unclear whether MH Care had met its obligations under the supply agreement and requested a detailed status update on MH Care outstanding commitments under the supply agreement, as well as a full accounting and reconciliation of the prepayments MH AHS made to MHCare in connection with the purchase order for the children's acetaminophen, and B, requested details of the affiliation between one or more former AHS employees and MHCare in around November 2022 when the terms of the $70 million purchase order were being negotiated with AHS. This request was made after AHS had discovered that Prasad appeared to have an MHCare email address in November 2022. In its letter, AHS requested this information from MHCare no later than January 8th, 2025. But allegedly, on December 23rd, Menzelopoulos received a letter from Alberta Health Assistant Deputy Minister Chris Nickerson. The letter instructed Menzelopoulos to wind up the internal investigation and transfer all related files to Alberta Health. From there, the new year moved very quickly, and all of a sudden, Dan Williams, the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, his name allegedly entered the chat. On January 2nd, 2025, Menzelopoulos spoke with the Deputy Minister of Mental Health and Addictions, who told her that his minister, the Honorable Dan Williams, was, quote, very concerned, end quote, about the AHS internal investigation and the forensic audit, including the investigation of, quote, our good friend JP, end quote, JP being a reference to Prasad in brackets. The minister was apparently concerned that the investigation could lead to potential connections between various government officials and Sam Mraiche and MHCare Medical. The deputy minister asked Menzelopoulos if Alberta Health and Andre, meaning Tremblay, in brackets, were saying, quote, to back off and tamp stuff down, end quote. Menzelopoulos advised the deputy minister that she had been directed to wind down the investigation, but she was becoming increasingly concerned she would face retaliation as a result of having initiated the investigation and forensic audit in the first place. Menzelopoulos was concerned about how Minister Williams had heard about the internal AHS investigation and told the information had been shared by Nicole in Minister Lagrange's office. And then the walls allegedly began to close in. The next section. On January 7th, 2025, Minister Lagrange met with AHS Board of Directors and demanded that they terminate Menzelopoulos. However, the AHS board refused the minister's demand. Shortly after this meeting, Tremblay contacted AHS staff and ordered that they cancel the January 10th, 2025 meeting with the Auditor General. On January 8th, the day that MHCare was allegedly directed to comply with AHS demands for information, Athana Menzelopoulos was terminated. So to sum up the allegations, Athana Menzelopoulos filed a lawsuit after being fired. The lawsuit claims she was fired because she discovered massive irregularities tied to alleged government interference and influence of contracts being awarded, and that one of the key figures in those contracts, an individual named Jitendra Prasad, was the go-to guy for the Premier's chief of staff, a friend of at least one other minister, and allegedly had direct ties to MHCare and Sam Mraiche, who had been the beneficiaries of contracts that he had overseen. She alleges that she initiated investigations into these claims and that the government not only reached into AHS to take control of the contracts being awarded, but that the government and the health minister went out of their way to shut down and take control of those investigations and then had Athana fired. But as we mentioned at the top of the show, Lagrange was all about an investigation into popsicles and moved super fast on that one. And allegedly, she was told by the Premier's chief of staff to fire me for my job as a paramedic. Again, to be clear, everything that we've referenced here is from Athana Menzelopoulos' statement of claim. What is included in that statement of claim has yet to be tested in a court of law. We're going to call that the end of part one of this saga, because the Alberta government responded hard to the lawsuit, and they actually changed their reasoning multiple times for the firing of Menzelopoulos. Next week, we'll get into the rest of it, including the government's response, Athana's response to their response, and the government's response to the response to the response, which seems to include some absolutely bizarre revisionist history. All of that being said, I am super excited for what I get to do next, because as I have talked about at length, we spent the month of March talking about coal mines, the impact of coal mines. And as much as I would love to be able to say, oh, the show deserves all the credit for that one, we don't. We were able to produce those interviews because of the efforts of a concerned citizen in Southern Alberta who had actually reached out to us to say, hey, would you be willing to talk to some folks and do a series of interviews and a little bit more that got a little bit derailed because of the whole injunction thing. I'm very excited to welcome him to the show, and we're actually going to have a little bit of a chat about why he did the things that he did, why he reached out to the show. And we're going to talk about the fact that we're not done yet. We've got some goals and aspirations. So I'm very, very excited to welcome to the show Blaine Mohan. Blaine, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight, especially so late after I ranted and raved for so long.
Well, thanks, Nate. I appreciate you having me on, and I don't know how the hell I'm going to follow that. Like between the AHS stuff and that, but you know what we're dealing with here, and what Southern Alberta, from Calgary south and potentially north of there too, we're looking at our water.
Oh no! Damn you, rural Alberta internet! I mean, I guess that's one way to not have to follow all the AHS stuff. We lost Blaine. I think we might have gotten him back, though. Are you there, sir? Oh, this is super choppy. Okay. While we wait for the internets of Blaine to hopefully reconnect, I'm going to talk a little bit about what's coming, because I really can't stress enough how the dangers of doing a live show. I really can't stress enough how much Blaine's efforts really made the whole interview series that we did a reality. He connected the show with all the people that we spoke to. He did an excellent job of making sure that people were available and willing to talk to us. Did we get you back?
Yeah, I hope so. Like, I don't know, like this maybe is, we call him Star-Lord here. Elon maybe is doing something where I live.
Oh, are you on the Starlink?
Yes, we call him Star-Lord here. That's how you're supposed to refer to him, is Star-Lord. So
Star-Lord's cooler.
Yeah, so yeah, hopefully I'm back now. We don't know what's going on, so I apologize for that. So,
no worries at all. I'm just happy that we're able to keep coming back to it, and I'm sure our audience is used to me vamping at length, and we just lost him again. Okay, here's what I'm gonna do. Because I don't want to waste Blaine's time. I'm going to arrange a conversation with Blaine, and we're going to talk about the plans and all of the things, because it was his passion and his conviction in making sure that the conversations around Grassy Mountain became a bigger conversation than they already were, that brought us to doing the show and the interviews. We're not done. Blaine has generously offered to take me on and the show on a tour of Southern Alberta, so we can see the areas that are going to be affected. I think we got him back one more time. We'll try this one more time and see how it works. Are you there, sir?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, I don't know what's going on.
There must be flocks of birds flying north for spring.
Yeah. So I apologize, but thank you, Nate, for taking this on and for spending so much of your valuable time with this and that. So I know you've been a little tied up, so to speak, recently in that. So, but yeah, I appreciate you getting everybody on. There's a lot of knowledgeable people, way more knowledgeable than I am on specific areas, that I really appreciate you giving them a chance to speak to this. So
I got to say, I really, really, like all of the conversations were great, and everybody that we spoke to had so much insight and so much knowledge that they shared. And if you're listening to or watching this episode right now and you haven't gone back and watched those, you really, really should. But the one that meant the most to me was the conversation with Adam Northpagan. His willingness to talk about all of the things that influence how something like Grassy Mountain and how Northback does its things was a conversation that I have been hoping to have for literally years. And so I cannot thank you enough for facilitating that.
Yeah, no, and I don't know Adam personally. You know, I've you know, been introduced to him on the internet and that stuff, but I think you know, with respect to that, you know, the Piikani Nation has come out officially in favor of this, but I don't blame Nation leadership for taking jobs and money that people are offering for them. That's, you know, that anyone would do that, right? And I think they're looking at this. I think they're considering doing a referendum on their own and that. But I am really thrilled to hear the Kainai Nation come out, and they are steadfastly against it. And I can tell you this, while I'm still able to speak while Star-Lord is allowing this, I can tell you this, that I'll be with the Kainai members on Grassy Mountain, and they'll have to drag me off there before they put a shovel in the ground. I can tell you that. Like this is absolutely wrong. It's wrong in 100 ways. If you follow the law or regulatory process, any of this stuff, this was all researched and done. A whole bunch of really smart people did a lot of work in 2020 and 2021, leading to a joint review panel decision by the Alberta Energy Regulator to reject it, and the federal environment minister. And so now you've got Danielle Smith in this video. I'm just wild about it. That's the first time I've seen that video you showed. So, and for Danielle Smith to suggest that they can do this without impacting our water, which is why I'm here, which is why I'm doing all this. Okay, to suggest that she knows that they can do that, well, yeah, we're gonna do this. We're gonna underground mine. The reality is that you can't. You're gonna dig a hole without digging a hole. Somewhere that coal has got to come out of the ground. Somewhere there's going to be disturbed ground in there. Okay, that's going to lead to selenium. That's going to lead to all kinds of problems. We have 100. I have a photo of it. I'll send it to you, Nate. I have a photo of the wind. There's a wind sign right along south of on the east or the west side of the pass. 183 kilometer-an-hour wind was when the sign got blown over. Okay, how are you going to control wind-borne contamination? They talk, oh, we're gonna put in a covered railway from the mine down to the that where they're transferring that coal is right beside the hospital. Okay, like you can't, there is no way you're going to be able to do this well. I come from a family, like I'll tell you this right now, and while I got a chance to say this, I'm a card-carrying redneck. I didn't vote for Danielle Smith because I know what she's like. Okay, I care about the land and I care about what's right and wrong. I want my kids, I want to be able to give my kids something that I can be proud of. Okay, and I don't know how Brian Jean or Danielle Smith look at themselves in the mirror. Okay, when they're circumventing their own regulator, that they, oh yeah, no, the regulators got this. Well, they did. They made this decision in 2021. We're going backwards here, and it's politicians that are deciding this, and they admit they're doing it because, well, we got ourselves in some trouble, and now we're being sued. Oh no, it's because we need to make windmills. They're entirely fiberglass, copper, and steel. So you know. There's very little steel and there's a lot of copper, but it's mostly fiberglass. Like we live beside hundreds of windmills down here. So for her to claim that's pretty disingenuous, and these people are pretty good at that. But like I said, I'd like to get back to like this. This is about our water, and I thank you again for putting all these people on. That. I think that the part of the reason I contacted you is to try to get a hold of younger people. I'm a blue hair, see? Okay, and us blue hairs, you see us at the rallies and stuff and saying, that we need some younger folks to get involved in this. We need some people that the Conservatives are going to recognize and say, these young people aren't going to vote for us ever if we continue to do this. This is you know, I'm 63. You know, God knows how long I got left on this big rubber ball. But you know, my goal is to protect the water for people behind us. You know, and I will not understand. I can't. I just why they're so steadfastly promoting this, and why she would suggest that, oh no, we're looking for these minerals, these precious metals. I want to mention this too as well about Rebecca Schultz. She's our Minister of Environment who went to Japan to promote liquid natural gas. Some crazy ass shit. But I you know, like, so that's our Minister of Environment went to Japan to promote liquid natural gas. I don't know which planet I'm living on, but anyways, she went out and she started a study here I think it was last year or a couple of months ago. And I'm sorry, my wife is sitting here with me, and she started a study here in Alberta for Alberta Water. But a buddy and I believe that study is going to be the cover for them to do deep water studies, because lithium is not found as a solid. It's found as a liquid. It's found in water. That's what they're looking for. One of the things that they're looking for. I mean, I can't imagine all of it, but they're doing it under the environmental guise of we're protecting your water, people. We're looking out for you, right? The same person that went to Japan to promote liquid natural gas as the environment minister. As the environment minister, I don't know what, like I said, I don't know what more I can say than that. You know, I don't know if people look themselves in the eyes and say, I'm the environment minister and I'm going to Japan to promote liquid natural gas.
Yeah. I mean, it's and the chat's pointing out here that her husband is in fact an oil and gas lobbyist, so I'm sure there's no conflict there. But it is.
Yeah, I've heard that of others as well in the legislature that are conservatives, right? So or United Conservatives. So
yeah.
But I don't know if I know you've been involved in your own lawsuit stuff. So, and I'm sorry about that. And I hope that it's BS as well. But one of the things I've done is I had some between when we talked last and now is I read the lawsuits. I'm pretty sure we got a pretty smart border collie here. I'm pretty sure she could rewrite those and they would seem more articulate and well done than what those lawsuits look like. And we're supposed to be afraid of those as taxpayers. You know, there's more to this than what they're saying. They're trying to diffuse and deflect what the real problems are with this. But again, it gets right back to the same thing. Whatever the politicians are doing, I can tell you one thing out there. One of the things I wanted to talk about tonight was what people can do. Okay, what can you guys do out there to make a difference? I can tell you this. Okay, talking to them, I have a better conversation with the wall. These people, they are not listening. Okay, they do not care what we say. Science. Oh, you know, I want. What was it? Chelsea Petrovic said to me, I want peer-reviewed science from after 1974, as if the laws of gravity don't apply, because it was that those laws were written in 1689. So, yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. But to get back to where I was going on this, I think people need to understand that the government is going ahead with this stuff. Okay, so talking to your own MLAs or the ministers, you can do that stuff. I think it's great. Okay, but what we've done is we're kind of targeting the weakest MLAs that won by the smallest amounts in Calgary. Okay, and that is Calgary Fish Creek, Calgary Lougheed, Calgary East, I believe. If you look through the last election, these guys didn't win by a lot. So to me, if you want to target them, if you live in those ridings, okay, if you want to target them and say, look, I'm going to write them an email and say, look, I'm going to come out for the NDP. I'm going to promote NDP in the next election unless you get off of this stuff. Okay, I believe that might have a difference. Certainly, voting them out is the only way. Like that, I'm more concerned about the fact that the damage that was done 50, 60 years ago. I just want to remind folks, seeing as I get a chance to do this, those mines closed up because the price of coal fell or because the coal ran out. 50, 60 years ago, they closed. They walked away from their mining responsibilities. So these new mines come in and they say, oh, look, that's terrible. We can clean that up. You let us make a hole 10 times bigger. 10 times bigger. Okay? And then we'll clean it up. That little part there, we promise we'll clean it up. Now, we know that we're going to be under the regulations, the old regulations, because these new ones sound really hard. So we're not going to do it under those. Okay, so we're going to do it under the old regulations. And the old regulations are the old bonds, the security that they have to put up. And it basically encourages mines to say, yeah, I'm going to walk away. Now, I told you this when we met, and I'll tell you again, why isn't Teck doing this? That's a question to ask yourself. When Teck applies for a mine, they don't create a shell company and apply for the mine. Teck applies for the mine. Teck is currently working on trying to rehab a mine a coal mine, okay, and they're having a hell of a time. They cannot stop the selenium issue, okay, and that's what they told the people in the Coal Policy Committee, all right, that they can't get that done. But they are working their tails off, and I'm pretty proud of Teck because that's the kind of company they are. These companies are shell companies. This isn't
Benga.
Not Benga. The name of the company, Hancock Holdings or Hancock.
Yes,
that's the multi-billion-dollar company that owns Benga. They're not making the application. A shell company that's got a storefront in the pass. Oh yeah, and we trust you that you're going to clean this up. You're going to make a much bigger mess, and you're going to come in here and you're going to clean this up. Like it's mind-boggling to me that we're even considering this. And like I said, I'm not anti-oil or anti-coal. Okay, I worked in the oil industry, and my entire family on my dad's side worked at a mine in Trail, British Columbia. It used to be called CM&S. It's now Teck, and Teck owns that place. Okay, my dad worked his tail off to move to Alberta to get out of there because he thought that mine was bad for people. His dad and all 5 of my uncles or my dad's brothers passed away before they were 65. My dad lived till he was 80 here in Alberta. So yeah, mines are really good for us. Okay, they created the town of Trail. I'm not saying they don't do that. Okay, like you can have mines and stuff, and I get, we need critical minerals and stuff, but. What about the concept? I'm going to say something now because I'm live and I get a chance to say this. What about the concept of less? Do we really need to have more? We need to have more. One of the arguments that was given to me was we need this coal mine because it helps to create the steel that we make. You know how the big earth movers we have? Well, we have these large earth movers. Okay, and so we need the steel to be able to build the hose and all the equipment we need to be able to move the coal out of the ground. Why don't you just leave the coal in the ground and not build the equipment to take it out? I mean, that's. I'm sorry, that's the way I feel, right? They're coming up with all kinds of new ways to do stuff, right? And there's these electric arc. Manufacturers that manufacture the steel, okay, and there's recycling that again manufactures high quality steel. Okay, so like, what are we doing here?
Well, and I think it's interesting. Like, I really do appreciate, and this was one of the things that I really, really appreciated about, for the record, Blaine was very generous with his time with me and had multiple conversations as we were going through the process of doing the interviews. And, the fact that you're not anti-industry, you're not anti-resource development, but you recognize what I've taken from, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but what I've taken from our conversations is you recognize the importance of, if we're going to do resource extraction for the things that we need, let's make sure that we do it right. And I'm thinking about the fact we saw that the Athabasca Chippewa Nation, First Nation, is suing the Alberta government because they have no trust in the AAR, and they're concerned about, just very, very recently in 2022 and 2023, there were leaks into the waterways. And that's with the stuff that we're supposed to be really, really good at. That's with the oil and gas stuff. And if we're still seeing in 2022 and 2023 these environmental catastrophes happening that First Nations folks are taking the government to court over and saying that they have no trust in the government or the AAR to manage these things, that does not make our industry look good. That does not make our province look good on an international level. And Danielle Smith can bring in the energy war room into her office to get around the laws about lying about environmental records, but it doesn't change the fact that people in industry are smart and they don't want to see. I have friends who work in oil and gas. I have family members who worked in oil and gas. Nobody's like, ha ha ha, let me get my money and screw the planet. Yeah. That's not what the blue collar folks are advocating for. In fact, they're advocating for the same things that you're advocating for. And I think that's really, really important to highlight in this whole conversation, is that it's not about anti-resource development. It's about, let's do it right. And if we can't do it right, should we even be doing it?
Yeah. To that point, I think there's something really critical here. The joint review panel, Alberta Energy Regulator and the Federal Environment Ministry, looked at this in 2021. Okay, and they went through a whole environmental study and that said, look, yeah, this is not, you're not able to do this. So parallel to that, okay, now then you have the governments doing whatever it was they were doing, and they clearly didn't expect this joint review panel to come back with a no, that this is a terrible idea. Now, if the way this should work is that Northback should put forth an application for a new mine, just like we can't stop them from applying for mines. Okay, we did stop them from applying for exploration permits, which Brian Jean, with the one swipe of his pen, eliminated that exploration moratorium. But we, at least in Alberta, we're trying to our politicians are making claims that should be made through a regulatory process. Okay, so what I mean is that if Northback makes an application for a new mine where they said, look, we've come up, there's this other mine, one in China, one in Australia, okay, and they've done this, and there's proven evidence that you can do this. Okay, well, let's look at it, and now let's reevaluate this because there's new information. But failing that, you've got our premier of the province suggesting that, oh, no, they can do this. They can dig a hole without digging a hole. Underground mining. Well, are you going to start in BC? Are you going to dig the hole? You're going to start in BC and you're going to come under and you're going to dig it that way? Because that seems really expensive to me. And the last time I checked, I think they're in the profit business, not in the underground mining business. So I really, like I said, that's the part to me that if you follow this stuff in terms of fairness, that's really grotesquely unfair for the premier of the province, who knows nothing about this stuff, to suggest that, oh yeah, we can do this. We can dig a hole without digging a hole. Sorry, I went on.
No, that's good. I want to talk about the tour, because you're going to give me a tour down there. I'm going to be coming down at the end of the month, and I want you to tell, if you can, a little bit of foreshadowing. What because I'm bringing the cameras and I'm bringing some help. What do you got in mind? If you can talk about that for just a second.
Well, I'm gonna try and get in. We're looking in. Apparently, Northback themselves gives tours of the mine. I'm going to try and get us in there. And I'm probably going to need some help from you, but I'm going to try and get us in there. Now, they're probably going to tell us, well, not with cameras. We don't want any pictures of this. I don't know what their regulations are going on a tour there. Okay. Clearly, you know, all they're going to do is Google my name, and I'm sure they're going to find out that, yeah, this guy's, we don't want him anywhere near there. So, but at any rate, that's one of the things we have. But I need you to see down here, specifically like where the windmills are, okay, and where the mine is in relation to the windmills. And then again, windmills, the guys that build the windmills, it's funny, they put those things in places where there tends to be wind. And, you know, wind in a coal mine where, you know, in the Elk Valley, there's very little wind compared to what there is here. You're hidden in the mountains there. And when we get the wind, it comes specifically off the mountains, you know, down across Crow's Nest Pass and then out through here where I live. I live 50 kilometers or so west of where Grassy Mountain is. Sorry, east. Yeah, I don't know why I said west, but at any rate, but that's really the issue. And so I plan on taking you around here to see like where the mines are, and the people that this is going to affect. This is rural Alberta. This isn't, you know, we're not a bunch of people hugging trees, saying, holding hands, singing "We Are the World." Okay, like maybe I might do that, but they're, you know, this is a rural country, and when you look at the people that are so dead set against this, this is supposed to be Danielle Smith's base. Right now, is it all of her base? No, clearly, but I hope it's enough where we can make a difference and get some younger folks involved in Calgary and in Red Deer and in Lethbridge, where this could make a real difference, because it's you guys' water too. It's not just ours.
Yeah, 100%. Well, and as I think the folks who did some of the interviews highlighted, I mean, you think about the water and everybody immediately thinks about drinking water, but it's so much bigger than that. It's the agri-food industry. It's all of the industry that exists in Southern Alberta. And if that drops off, if that gets hurt, then that massively affects the rest of the province. So I'm really looking forward to that tour. And I'm really looking forward to producing an on the road episode of the breakdown. I think that's going to be a blast. I'm coming up to the 2.5 hour mark here pretty quick.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want people to hear? Is there anything else that you want people to see? Do you have any other asks of anybody? I'll give you the whole floor here.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I think this is not just our water. This is like Southern Alberta's water. Okay. Southern Alberta and Southern Saskatchewan are the driest parts of the country. We don't have the luxury of multiple water sources like they do in British Columbia, where they've ruined the water anywhere near coal mines. So that's really what this is about. You guys, you younger guys, you got to get off your duffuses and get out there and get involved. And like I said, I think the weak spots we're going after are where they just barely won in elections, and that where they won by, you know, 500 votes or 300 votes or 1,000 votes, you know, whatever that is, and try and shake the tree from that end and see if we can get some success that way. So.
That's awesome, sir. I got to say that the chat is loving you tonight.
I don't know about that, but
no, there's like people are saying your sense of humor is winning, scoring huge points. Dwayne, I want to thank you so much, Blaine, for taking the time to chat.
Thank you very much, Nate, for everything you're doing, not just this, but for everything. So thank you.
Well, and in a weird way, I almost feel like I have to say thank you to the Elon for allowing us to have this conversation.
Yeah, I think he's a little too concerned about some other things right now. It seems like he's trying to save Tesla from going in the toilet. So, you know, at least if he's not, he should be. But
that's fair. Well, thank you very much, sir. And I'm really looking forward to the tour. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Nate.
All right. We're going to wrap up the show for the evening. Now we're going to call it Dunzo because this has turned into it was inevitable. The first live show since all of the very bad things, and it was of course going to go long, but it was really, 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 really important to me to make sure that Blaine was the linchpin for making so much of what happened with those interviews happen. And I'm so grateful that he's willing to give me a tour of what is currently, at least, one of the most beautiful parts of the province. I love taking I went camping down in Beaufort Lake like a year and a half ago, and it was amazing. So, really, really looking forward to that. We get to the plugs. I don't know if I'm going to be able to remember how to do these, but I'm going to try. Before we get to the plugs, though, I got to say, we got this thing that we've been working on, and we were going to launch it back in February, and we launched it for our Patreon supporters. But we're going to make it public now because we spent so much time talking about how Danielle Smith is doing an amazing job throwing Canada under the bus. She is claiming big wins while oil prices are tanking. She's talking about secession. She's giving dog whistles for how people who want Alberta to leave Canada can instigate and initiate citizen-led referenda. And here's the thing. There's a lot of Albertans out there who are proud Canadians. I think the vast majority of Albertans out there are proud Canadians. And the reality is, like, I'm looking at doing some traveling this summer. I know there's other people who are probably looking at doing the traveling this summer. And when you're traveling across Canada with the Alberta license plates, people might make some assumptions. The good news is the breakdown is here to help. I'm so bad at this. The good news is the breakdown is here to help you travel across the country this summer in a small, silly, irreverent way. We got bumper stickers made. They're not big, but they have the little arrow, and the arrow is you put the bumper sticker right beside your license plate. And then that says to everybody who sees your Alberta license plates, no, we're the cool ones. In our heads, it's kind of like the reverse in a weird way of doing the Americans put the Canadian flags on their backpacks. Well, we're real Canadians. And we want to enjoy the rest of Canada. We don't want to travel to the States while Donald Trump is being Donald Trump. So we have the bumper stickers. And if you want one of these bumper stickers, we're literally giving them away. All you have to do is send us a message. You can email us. You can send us, actually email us, because that way it'll all be in one place. You can email us at our email address, which is info@thebreakdownab.ca. All we're asking for is people cover the cost of shipping, and we're calling it $5. So if you send us an email and let us know how you'd like to send us $5, then we'll get one of these in the mail for you. And you can travel the country and show a little bit of patriotism. And you can even drive it on your vehicle here in Alberta and show a little patriotism, because Canada is an awesome country. And all of us here, we have like 250, I think 400. I don't know. We have got a whole bag full. Send us an email. There's no data collection. It's not. There's none of that nonsense. It was a fun little thing that we thought we could do, so we're doing it. And that's the story of that. We're probably going to do some more sticker stuffs just because everybody loves stickers. That's it. Here's the spiel. If you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, then you can help support us by signing up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab. You can set the price of how much you want to support us. Recognize that times are tough right now. And with the price of oil bottoming out this weekend, it's probably going to remain tough for a little while. So set your own price. But it is our Patreon supporters that allow us to do all of the things that we do. We have some FOIP requests that are pending. Very excited to get them back. oddly, a lot of them are being referred to the privacy commissioner right now for some reason. But we're going to continue doing the FOIPs, the equipment that we have that makes the show possible, the going down to the Crow's Nest Pass to be able to do an in-person. All of this is made possible by the financial support that we get from our Patreon sponsors. If you're not into the monthly commitment, you're not looking for the long-term relationship, then you can also use that same email, the info at thebreakdownab.ca to just send us an e-transfer if that's what you want to do. That's totally cool. We would love that. And that's the spiel. I want to say a big thank you to everybody who has stuck around for the 2.5 hours almost that this thing has turned into. I want to say a big thank you to all I gotta say, one of the things that I have missed the most about doing the live show, and it's been a little challenging. Like, I had a whole script that I was reading for part of the night and everything, because I have to be careful about what I say. But one of the things that the thing that I've missed the most is our chat group. Seeing the people in the chat, seeing the positive interactions that go on in the chat, seeing the support that everybody in the chat shows for everybody else. I love it so much. And I'm so glad that we're back to doing the live stuffs, because I missed them terribly. I missed you guys. It sounds cheesy. It's just speaking from the heart. I saw a couple people in the chat as well asking about the shirt. It is the Screaming Beaver shirt. And well, maybe I'll throw the link in because it's a Canadian artist. So that's the things. That's the stuff. Thank you all so much for tuning in. If you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, you can leave the review and the comments and the 5 stars and all of that. Hey, also bonus side quest. It's been brought to my I'm just being such a jerk tonight. It's remarkable. It's been brought to my attention that LinkedIn is apparently a streaming environment that some people should participate on. If you have to have 100 followers on LinkedIn for the breakdown, I think we have like 3 because it's LinkedIn and I put 0 effort into it. But if you want, you can go up and follow the breakdown on LinkedIn, and then we'll stream there for no reason other than because we can. Thank you all so much tonight. It's great to be back. That's what I got. In the meantime and in between time, I just want to say we have some episodes in the queue. I'll plug really quickly for anybody who's unfamiliar. The disabled community is getting screwed improperly by the UCP right now. The federal government has implemented a program that would see $200 a month go to people on a number of disability supports. The UCP has responded by saying, cool, we'll take that money. And if you don't want to give it to us, then we'll just cut what people on AHS get, because I don't know. Like, it's just horrible. It's just horrible. So we actually sat down and did a panel discussion. We're going to be bringing that episode forward later this week. And that panel discussion was with a bunch of members of the disabled community who are incredibly passionate advocates. And it is a powerful, powerful conversation. I'm really excited to be presenting it because we have been getting no shortage of messages and DMs and emails from folks saying, hey, are you guys going to be talking about this? And 100% we're going to be talking about this. And we're going to be using that conversation as a springboard to talk about how incredibly draconian this move by the UCP is at a time where they're increasing their own salaries for MLAs and ministers. And somebody in the chat earlier said that the housing allowance that MLAs get exceeds what people on AHS get to do life in a month. It's absolutely reprehensible that the UCP is taking the $200 that the federal government is trying to give people just to get a little hair's worth of breathing room. It's absolutely bonkers. So please do tune in for that conversation. And my apologies to all of the folks who were waiting for us to do something with it. These, if I could just do this full time for a living. And then the premier couldn't fire me, or try to, allegedly. Thanks, everybody. We're going to see you. We'll be back next week with another live show. I promise it won't go 2.5 hours, he said, knowing that it probably will because we live in Alberta and all of these things are happening. But thank you to everybody. Have a great week. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And as always, keep the conversation going.